Chapter 1. The Whispering Shadows of Meadowbrook. Meadowbrook was the kind of town where the mundane became a ritual. There was a certain rhythm to life here, a slow, methodical dance of day-to-day interactions, where everyone had their role to play. The lawns were manicured to perfection, the streets were always clean, and even the grocery store had a warm, familial hum. It was as if the town operated on invisible strings, gently pulling its residents along a path of tranquil sameness. But behind the white picket fences and well-kept hedges, not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. Beneath the surface, there were cracks, small fractures in the facade of harmony that few dared to acknowledge. These fissures were born from whispered judgments, lingering stares, and the unspoken rules that kept people in their places. It was a town where everyone knew each other, but not all relationships were as welcoming as they appeared. Sarah Whitman was one of the town's most recognizable figures. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, and her wardrobe was impeccable. With her daughter Lily by her side, she commanded attention wherever she went. Sarah took pride in her image. She was the quintessential suburban mom, involved in every community event from bake sales to the PTA. Meadowbrook was her stage, and she played her part flawlessly. But Sarah had her secrets. Deep down, she harbored a quiet resentment, a simmering dislike for those who didn't fit her image of what was right. She never spoke of it openly, never let it surface for others to see, but it was there, a small, gnawing sense of superiority that clouded her interactions with anyone who didn't quite look or act like her. She told herself it wasn't hatred, just discomfort, but the truth was far more sinister. On the other side of town, Isaiah lived a life that was markedly different. He was young, barely 6 years old, with wide, curious eyes and a head full of soft curls. His mother, Amina, had moved to Meadowbrook a few years ago, hoping to provide her son with a better life. Isaiah loved the town's parks and the friendly neighborhood dogs, but he had never felt quite at home here. There was always a sense that he and his mother were outsiders, tolerated but never fully embraced. One afternoon, while playing in the park, Isaiah had met Lily. They had hit it off instantly, laughing and chasing each other around the playground. For Isaiah, it had been one of the few moments where he felt like he belonged, like Meadowbrook wasn't such a cold place after all. But for Sarah, the sight of her daughter playing with a black boy had stirred something unpleasant inside her, a quiet discomfort she couldn't shake. She had pulled Lily away, telling herself it was nothing, but the image of the two children together lingered in her mind. Days passed, and the incident at the park faded from memory, replaced by the everyday demands of suburban life. But for Sarah, that unease remained. She found herself watching Isaiah from a distance whenever she saw him in town, her eyes narrowing as if she were searching for something, some reason to validate her discomfort. And then, one Saturday afternoon at Meadowfresh, the local grocery store, that opportunity presented itself. Chapter 2, The Moment of Decision. It was a typical Saturday. Sarah and Lily were out for their weekly grocery run. The aisles of Meadowfresh bustled with activity, the sound of shopping carts rolling over linoleum blending with the soft hum of overhead lights. Sarah guided Lily through the store with practiced ease, selecting items with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. As they reached the cereal aisle, Sarah spotted him. Isaiah was standing a few feet away, his small hands reaching for a box of cookies on a lower shelf. He was alone, his mother out of sight somewhere else in the store. A chill ran through Sarah as her eyes fixated on the boy. He didn't belong here, not in her town, not near her daughter. The thought crept into her mind unbidden, and before she could stop herself, she was walking toward him. "Stay right here, sweetheart," she whispered to Lily, leaving her daughter behind as she approached Isaiah. Isaiah looked up, his innocent face framed by dark curls, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Sarah stood before him, her arms crossed, the weight of her gaze heavy on the young boy. "Where's your mommy, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice tinged with a false sweetness. Isaiah hesitated, glancing toward the produce section. She's getting apples," he replied, his voice small, unsure. Sarah glanced in the direction he had pointed, spotting Amina in the distance. For a brief moment, guilt flickered in her chest. She could simply turn around, go back to her shopping, leave the boy alone. But that dark voice in her head whispered louder. He doesn't belong here. He's different. Her eyes dropped to the cookies in Isaiah's hands, and an idea formed. It was an ugly, twisted thought, but it felt satisfying. If she could just get rid of him, make it clear that people like him didn't belong in her perfect little world, then everything would be right again. She leaned down, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. Are you sure you're not going to steal those? Isaiah's eyes widened, and his grip on the cookies tightened. No, he stammered, I'm gonna ask my mom. Sarah's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculated look. I think you were going to take them without paying, she said, louder now, her voice carrying over the hum of the store. Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest. He shook his head frantically, his small voice pleading. No. I wasn't. But it was too late. Shoppers nearby turned to see what was happening, their curiosity piqued. Sarah stood tall, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression one of righteous indignation. Excuse me, she called out. This boy was about to steal something. Can someone help? Isaiah's world came crashing down. Panic surged through him as two store employees appeared, followed quickly by a pair of police officers who had been patrolling the area. Their faces were unreadable as they approached, but Isaiah felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. I didn't do anything, Isaiah whispered, clutching the cookies as if they were his last defense against the accusations being thrown at him. But no one seemed to hear him. Chapter 3, The Unraveling. The police officers were gentle but firm as they questioned Isaiah. One of them, a tall man with a soft voice, knelt down to the boy's level. Where's your mom, buddy? Isaiah pointed toward the produce section, his hand shaking. She's over there. I wasn't stealing, I swear. The officer nodded, but the suspicion lingered in his eyes. Sarah watched from a few feet away, her arms still crossed, satisfaction swelling in her chest. She had done it. She had put him in his place. But as she stood there, watching the scene unfold, a strange unease settled over her. This wasn't what she had expected. The power she had felt just moments ago was fading, replaced by something else, something darker. Doubts began to creep in, but it was too late to stop what she had set in motion. Amina appeared from around the corner, her face pale with fear as she saw the officers surrounding her son. Isaiah, she cried, rushing toward him. She dropped her bag of apples, not caring that they rolled across the floor. What's going on? Isaiah ran into his mother's arms, sobbing. I didn't do anything, Mom. I didn't take anything. Amina held him close, her eyes flashing with anger as she turned to the officers. My son didn't steal anything. He's just a child. What's going on here? The officers exchanged glances, their expressions softening. We're just following up on a report, one of them said, gesturing toward Sarah. This woman said she saw him trying to steal. Amina's eyes locked on Sarah, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. There was something in Amina's gaze that shook Sarah to her core, a mix of anger and sorrow, of disbelief and betrayal. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her hands trembling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The store manager arrived, and soon after, they reviewed the security footage. It took only minutes to confirm what Isaiah had been saying all along, he hadn't stolen anything. The cookies had never left his hands. He had been an innocent boy, browsing the shelves like any other child. Sarah's world crumbled around her. The weight of what she had done hit her with the force of a freight train. She had lied, she had used her position of privilege to manipulate the situation, and now everyone knew the truth. The police officer, who had initially believed her, turned to Sarah with a look of disdain. Ma'am, he said quietly, we'll be filing a report about this incident. You're free to go, but I suggest you think carefully about your actions next time. Sarah couldn't breathe. The walls of the store seemed to close in on her as she hurried toward the exit, the stares of the other shoppers following her like ghosts. She had thought she was in control, but now she was the one being judged. Chapter 4, the consequences word of the incident spread through Meadowbrook like wildfire. By Monday morning, everyone knew about what had happened at Meadowfresh. Sarah Whitman, the woman who had once been admired by the community, was now a pariah. The whispers followed her everywhere she went, at the grocery store, at the PTA meetings, even in her own neighborhood. The perfect life she had built for herself was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. People avoided her now, their polite smiles replaced with cold stares. Even Lily's playdates began to dry up as other parents quietly distanced themselves from the Whitman family. Sarah's husband, oblivious to the full extent of the damage, tried to reassure her that it would all blow over, but Sarah knew better. Her name had become synonymous with shame, with prejudice, with lies. Meanwhile, Isaiah struggled to move past what had happened. Though he had done nothing wrong, the memory of that day haunted him. The fear, the humiliation, the knowledge that a stranger had tried to ruin his life for no reason other than the color of his skin, it stuck with him. But Isaiah was resilient, and with the unwavering support of his mother, he began to heal. Chapter 5, The Final Reckoning. Years passed. Isaiah grew into a strong, compassionate young man, determined to make a difference in the world. The memory of Meadowfresh remained with him, a reminder of the prejudice that still existed, but also a motivation to fight against it. He studied law, dedicating his life to helping those who, like him, had been wrongfully accused, mistreated, or marginalized. As for Sarah, her life never fully recovered. She remained in Meadowbrook, but she was no longer the queen bee of the community. She lived in the shadow of her actions, haunted by the consequences of her lie. Her name became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the smallest act of prejudice could have far-reaching, devastating consequences. Isaiah never saw Sarah again after that day in the grocery store, but he didn't need to. He had moved on, building a life for himself that was defined not by the hatred of others, but by the strength of his own character. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Ban ko thay dong nay kong, kan malagan hok het han plus t nan tin veo zalo night, 08686.01263. Ban de noi teep tuc fat trien ka chien chapt de noi, ChatGPT Chapter 6. The echo of truth. The years after the incident at Meadowfresh were a slow, arduous climb for Isaiah and his mother, Amina. Although they stayed in Meadowbrook, the town that had once seemed so full of opportunity now felt like a cage, a place haunted by that dark day when the truth was questioned and dignity nearly lost. Amina, a strong-willed woman with sharp features and a soft smile, refused to let the incident define them. She had always been the pillar of Isaiah's world, and even now, as her son struggled to process the emotional wounds left behind, she remained steadfast. Isaiah, this world will sometimes fail to see your worth, she told him one evening, as they sat on their porch, the sun setting behind the rows of identical houses. But it doesn't matter what they think. What matters is what you know about yourself. The truth always finds a way out. Isaiah nodded, though the weight of her words pressed heavily on his young heart. He was in high school now, a tall, lanky teenager with a bright future ahead of him. His intelligence shone through in every class, but he carried the quiet burden of that day at Meadowfresh like a scar that refused to fade. His peers knew the story, but most had forgotten the specifics, only remembering the gossip and rumors. For Isaiah, it was still crystal clear. Though time moved forward, his mind often wandered back to the sight of the officers approaching him, the fear gripping his chest, and the humiliation of standing accused of a crime he had never even thought of committing. He still heard Sarah Whitman's voice in his nightmares sometimes, her sweet smile twisted into something menacing as she pointed the finger. Yet, Isaiah was not a boy anymore. As he grew older, his understanding of the world deepened. His love for justice, his belief in fairness, and his drive to ensure that no one else would experience what he had grown stronger by the day. He devoured books on civil rights and history, drawing inspiration from figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and others who had fought not with fists, but with words and action. He was becoming someone who could make a difference, but the weight of Meadowbrook still pressed down on him, and it wasn't until his senior year of high school that the real reckoning began. Chapter 7, a community on edge. Sarah Whitman had become something of a ghost in Meadowbrook. After the incident at the grocery store, her once bustling social life had dwindled to almost nothing. The PTA meetings, the bake sales, the community events, she was no longer the woman everyone flocked to for guidance or friendship. People were polite, but distant. Her name, her presence, carried a silent weight. At home, things weren't much better. Her husband, Michael, was supportive in the beginning, believing that the town would forget in time. But as the months turned to years, their relationship grew strained. Michael started spending more time at work, and Sarah felt isolated in the very place she had once ruled. Worst of all, her relationship with Lily had changed. Lily, now a teenager, had grown distant, spending more time with friends and avoiding her mother whenever possible. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter blamed her for something, though they never spoke about it. Perhaps it was because Lily had seen the aftermath of what Sarah had done, had seen Isaiah humiliated, his innocence stripped away in the grocery store. Or maybe it was because Lily had grown into a young woman who could see the world in ways her mother never had. One evening, as Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of tea, Lily walked in. The tension between them was palpable. Lily had grown into a striking young woman, with her father's dark hair and her mother's sharp features, but she carried an air of independence that Sarah had never had at that age. "Mom," Lily began, her voice soft but firm, "I want to talk to you." Sarah looked up, her heart heavy. She had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, but knowing it would come. "I know what you did that day at the grocery store," Lily continued. "I know you accused Isaiah of stealing when he wasn't. I know you lied." Sarah flinched at the word lied, but she didn't interrupt. "Why did you do it?" Lily's eyes were searching, her voice full of something Sarah couldn't quite place, disappointment, anger, maybe even pity. Sarah's throat tightened. She had spent years trying to bury that day, trying to convince herself that she had been right to act the way she did, that it had been a misunderstanding. But now, faced with her daughter's clear-eyed accusation, she couldn't hide anymore. "I don't know," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "I was scared. I saw him, and I thought he was going to do something wrong. I don't know why I thought that. I was wrong." Lily shook her head, her eyes filled with sadness. "You weren't scared, Mom. You just didn't want to see him near me. You didn't like that we were playing together." The silence that followed was unbearable. Sarah felt a weight on her chest, a suffocating guilt that she had carried for too long. "I'm sorry," Sarah said finally, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Lily." But Lily didn't respond. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone with her guilt. Chapter 8, The Path Forward. Isaiah stood at the front of the auditorium, his high school graduation cap balanced precariously on his head. The room was filled with parents, teachers, and students, all there to celebrate the accomplishments of the graduating class. For Isaiah, this day meant more than just a diploma. It was the culmination of years of hard work, determination, and the quiet, unwavering support of his mother. As he stepped up to the podium to deliver his speech, he had been chosen as valedictorian. His eyes scanned the crowd. He saw Amina, beaming with pride, and beside her, a few of his close friends. But there was one person he didn't expect to see. Sarah Whitman sat toward the back, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. Lily was beside her, but it was clear from their body language that something had shifted between them. Isaiah's heart raced. He hadn't seen Sarah since that day at the grocery store, and though he had tried to move past it, seeing her now brought everything back. But this wasn't a moment for anger. This was his moment, a day to celebrate how far he had come, and to look forward to the future. He took a deep breath and began his speech. "Today, we stand at the edge of a new beginning," Isaiah said, his voice steady. "For many of us, this is a moment of reflection, a time to look back at where we've been and think about where we're going. We've all faced challenges, some of us more than others, but we're here now because we didn't let those challenges define us." As he spoke, his mind drifted back to that fateful day at Meadowfresh, to the moment when he had been accused, humiliated, and almost destroyed. But he had survived. He had thrived. I want to thank my family, my friends, and my teachers for believing in me when it wasn't always easy to believe in myself, he continued. And I want to say something to those of you who may have doubted me, or who may have thought I didn't belong. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. The crowd erupted in applause, but Isaiah's eyes were locked on Sarah. She was staring down at her hands, her face pale. For the first time, he saw not the woman who had wronged him, but a person who had been broken by her own actions. As the ceremony ended, Isaiah walked toward his mother, who embraced him tightly, tears of joy in her eyes. But before they could leave, someone else approached. It was Lily. Isaiah, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. Isaiah looked at her, surprised. You don't have to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. Lily nodded, her eyes filled with guilt. Maybe not directly, but I didn't stop it either. And I want you to know that I see it now. I see what my mom did, and it wasn't right. Isaiah smiled, a small, sad smile. Thank you, he said simply. As Lily walked away, Isaiah turned to his mother, and together, they left the auditorium. The future stretched out before him, full of possibilities. But the past would always be there, a reminder of the darkness that could creep into even the most perfect of places. And though Sarah Whitman remained in Meadowbrook, her name would forever be tied to a moment of cruelty and shame, a cautionary tale of what happens when fear and prejudice go unchecked. Chapter 9. The future we build. Years later, Isaiah became a successful civil rights lawyer, dedicating his life to ensuring that no child, no person, would ever face the kind of injustice he had endured. He fought for those who had no voice, those who were marginalized, oppressed, or wrongfully accused. In a world that was often filled with hate and division, Isaiah stood as a beacon of hope, a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would always find its way to the surface. As for Sarah Whitman, she remained in Meadowbrook, a relic of a past she could never fully escape. She spent the rest of her days in quiet reflection, haunted by the lie that had forever changed her life and the lives of those around her. In the end, it wasn't Meadowbrook that had been broken, it was the people within it. And though the town continued to thrive, its manicured lawns and perfect streets hiding the cracks beneath, the lesson of Isaiah's story lingered. Prejudice, no matter how small, no matter how subtle, has the power to destroy, but so too does truth have the power to heal.